exposure to previous webcasts and web discussions, but I did watch last week's and understand the context is the future of work. And today's topic is online learning, is it working? And we have three speakers in my discussant role. Adriana Lopez Ferreira will be speaking first, followed by Terry Godwaldt. And Moira Walker is, again, a late joining person who was going to also present in replacement of Haley Simmons, who also can't be with us today. So we have about 34 participants and about I guess, 80 minutes remaining. We'll endeavor to wrap up by 5:30. And I'll ask each of the presenters to just comment a little bit about their background. Before I do that, I'll just comment, my background is largely in education in Alberta, over 40 years of experience, 17 years in the field as a teacher, principal, director of research, and assistant superintendent in different jurisdictions, and 23 years with the Ministry of Education, where I worked largely in the areas of planning and accountability. So that's me. So we'll start with Adriana then, and turn it over to you, Adriana.
Sounds good, John. John, do you want me to start the presentation or just introduce myself?
Do both if you would.
Perfect. I'll get us started. So I'm going to share my screen. And as part of the presentation, I'll introduce my background. So let me know if you can see you see my screen?
Yep, it's loud and clear.
So online learning, is it working? So
yeah,
that wasn't, can you see that?
Yeah, you're good. Go ahead and proceed.
Perfect. So when I got the invitation, and thank you, Bruce Matishuk, for volunteering me to jump in and present, I was mulling the question in my mind. And for me, beyond the question of is it working, there is more to that because nothing is working. You can argue that in-person education is not working, online education is not working, remote work is not working. There are many things that we can improve on it. That said, online learning is here to stay. It was here 20 years ago, before the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, it has expanded and it has morphed into many new things, and it's here to stay. So beyond the question of, is it working? For me, the question is, how can we make it better? So that's the question that I have been mulling over for the past 3-5 years. And I want to give you a couple of insights into how we can make it better, how we can work with it, and what is preventing us right now in the present from making it better. So to your question, John, a little bit about my background. I'm Colombian Canadian. I've been in Canada for 21 years, and the accent doesn't go away. I tried everything, and my accent is still there. So I'll try speaking slowly, but if I accelerate, it's because I get excited. But hopefully you can understand me. I have a background in computing science and a master's degree in artificial intelligence from the University of Toronto. This was back in the early 2000s, just before it was cool. So I cannot say that I'm cool. I'm the president and CEO at Onlia, and we are an online learning company. We create online learning journeys for academia, and we work with such a variety of subject matter experts that it is awesome. And a mom and a bookworm. I love books. I love them. She, her. And I was for 11 years in my career, I was part of the video games industry, specifically at BioWare. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about towards the end will come from that. So just a heads up of where my thoughts are coming from. So now let's get started. I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, And if you don't mind typing just whatever comes to your mind on the chat window, that will be awesome. So the question is, who do you think are the competitors to Netflix? Who are Netflix competitors? Amazon Prime, yeah, that's a good one. YouTube, that's perfect. Disney, you got it. I see a question. Bruce, you are on the mark. So yes, Crave, Prime, Disney, those are the primary competitors. But did you know that video games are also competing with Netflix? And Bruce, like you mentioned, not only video games, but Netflix, the creators of Netflix, they know that they are competing with video games, they are competing with social media, they are competing with Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, they are competing with Roblox, Minecraft. And if you're from my generation, they are competing with Tetris. Why? Because it's about screen time. So when you're thinking about screen time and you have just an amount of time that you're in front of this screen and you can choose A, B, or C, whatever you choose, they are going to try to keep you inside there for as long as they can. And it's kind of like they use many of the techniques that create that kind of like, I want to continue, and I want to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. So when you are thinking that the minute you click in any of these icons, they are going to try to capture your attention and keep you there. And that is interesting. But what does that have to do with education? Well, when we were in the classroom, when our kids were in the classroom or ourselves, when we were in university, the teacher, whether it was a good teacher or a bad teacher, it didn't matter. The teacher, for the most part, had our attention. We were there. Even if we had our cell phone, for the most part, it was cell phones down, book up, here. You could argue that yes, there was some daydreaming or some thinking about something else, but your attention was there. It was on the screen. Now, what happens when education is not on a classroom anymore, but education happens on a screen? It means that our kids, ourselves, every time we are going through an education program, the education program is competing with Netflix, with Crave, with Prime, with Minecraft, with Tetris, with all of these. I don't know if any of you saw your grandchildren or your children going through the past months and trying to learn online, and how difficult it was, especially as a kid, but it happens to adults, it happens to all of us as well, where your attention might be on the screen, but it is at the same time being pulled in all these directions. Oh, what if I can check Facebook? Or, oh, maybe just 30 minutes of Netflix, 30 minutes of Netflix. But the problem is, the minute you get away from your online course and you go to Netflix, Netflix is designed to keep you there. And we know this is binge watching. Netflix is designed to keep you there for as long as it can keep you there. Minecraft is designed to keep you there for as long as it can. So when are you going to go back to your online learning? Tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow, maybe never. And I keep thinking about this. I have a 9-year-old and she's a good student. She's a good student. She loves learning, but the minute she's playing Roblox or Minecraft, there is no getting her away from it. Now, how do they do it? There are many techniques that they use to get you in there. So part of the argument is, how can we make online learning better? How can we make it work in a world that is competing for our attention, where now education is competing with leisure activities, where the two used to be separate, now they are on the same place at the same time. So part of what we can do is learn from what good teachers used to do in the past. So I'm going to ask you a second question right now, and very quickly. What do you remember that good teachers did? Your favorite teacher from university, from high school, what is one thing you remember them doing? And if you can put one or two things, read to us, inspire, funny, personal things. Look in my eyes, I like that, listen. Those are really good ones. I listen and engaging, those two are perfect. Connect. Promote software is interesting. So good teachers at the core of it are storytellers. Good teachers are similar to Netflix. Here is the thought process behind this. Good teachers are almost like Netflix. They keep you engaged, they keep you connected, they are looking at you. They are telling you a story about why you need to learn what you need to learn. And that's how they keep your attention. Again, similar to Netflix, YouTube, Minecraft, all of these, those are automatic. Now, good teachers do this. So how can we make online learning better? We need to get those good teaching techniques into the format. One of the ways that I like visualizing it is through the hero's journey. In the classroom, the hero is the teacher. In many ways, classical teaching is you're the teacher, you are in a pedestal, you are the hero. But in video games and in this new thought process around online learning, the hero is the student. The hero is the student going through that transformation. And if you're familiar with the hero's journey, it's using narrative to describe what a young person goes through. So Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, all of those use this type of narrative. So imagine the learner is called to adventure. They are called to take this class. They go through the threshold and start the online learning that they need to go through. Throughout, they get helpers and mentors. So the teacher, in this case, is the mentor, is Gandalf, or is Obi-Wan Kenobi. I hope you're getting, you're my generation and you get some of these ones. But that's the role of the teacher in online education, is that kind of mentorship. The student goes through challenges, they go through quizzes, they go through assessments, they go through evaluation, but all meanwhile, the teacher is there helping. They go through this transformation, and knowledge is that. Knowledge is transformation. By the time you finish learning about thermodynamics or computing science, you are a new person. You are a different person, and you go back to your life with new knowledge. So how can we make education and online learning better? In this case, let's acknowledge that we are competing with media. So let's take some of those techniques and make the learner the hero. Very quickly, I'll mention one more technique, and then I'll give it to the next presenter. So very quickly, one more technique inspired from the video games industry is the idea of engagement and motivation. And what video games and other types of media know well is that there are different types of gamers. Now let's apply to that too. There are different types of learners. So there are learners or individuals that enjoy exploring. They get motivated by content and by acting on that content. So collecting, viewing, voting, curating. There are the players or the learners that are motivated by acting with other players, with other learners. And there is competition, challenge. Now I'll put a parenthesis here that classical education, as a traditional education as we know it, is geared towards the competitive side. But there is more beyond that. There are the collaborators and the creators. And you can extrapolate from this that the good teachers in the past, whenever you remember those good teachers, you remember them because they motivated you wherever you were. They were able to put collaborative teams and creation activities and exploration activities. So one final thought on how can we make online education better. Online education, online learning can just not be for the competitors, cannot just be for one type of learner. online education needs to be for everyone, because similar to video games, again, going back to a metaphor, they are designed to keep you there, whoever you are and whatever motivates you. So online learning, even more so, needs to have that, needs to motivate you, whoever you are, wherever you are, because whatever knowledge you are about to receive is worth receiving. So with that in mind, I'll leave it here. And if you ever have questions, feel free to email me. I love talking about online education. So this is my email address if you ever have questions. And John, with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Adriana. Thanks for that presentation. I'll also comment, I checked out your website, on Leah's website, and it's definitely worth looking at. You've got some great examples of the work that you do there. So I'd encourage all the participants to check out your website as well.
Thank you, John. I love my team. It's an amazing team.
Yeah, I can tell the excitement and enthusiasm and passion you put into your work. So thank you. With that, I think we'll save comments and questions to the end of the presenters, and I will make a couple comments at the very end as well, and then we'll turn it open to general discussion. But for now, we'll turn it over to Terry. Are you ready to go, Terry?
For sure. Thank you so much, John.
Okay, thanks.
And a huge thank you to Adriana for that excellent presentation. I could not agree more about your premise and about the importance of making that learner the hero. And it links so very well into what I'm going to be sharing about, where we believe at the Center for Global Education that education without action is like food without exercise. It doesn't matter how good the food is, if all you're doing is sitting on the couch, you're going to get sick. And it doesn't matter how brilliant, and we do have exceptional teachers in this province and all across Canada. But if all students are doing is absorbing their learning and not finding ways to be the hero, as Adriana says, I think it has the potential actually to have a negative impact on students in the long run. But I'll get to that in the midst of the presentation. My name is Terry Godwaldt, and I'm kind of here wearing two hats. My day job is the National Director for the College Board. So the College Board is, you may be familiar with the SAT or Advanced Placement. I represent the College Board in Canada and help and work with both public school systems and universities to help more students transition more successfully to university. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about an organization that I used to head, that I'm still the executive director for, of the Center for Global Education. And the work that we do in terms of engaging students and providing those opportunities to become the hero in their learning. I think there's a couple of things we need to establish when it comes to online education, because it's quite simple right now to look at what's going on and say that, my goodness gracious, online education is alive and well and thriving. Can everybody see on full screen the my title slide? And maybe if I could, because
it looks good.
John, is that coming through?
Yes, it's good. Yeah. Okay,
excellent. Friends, when I reflect on when I started the Center for Global Education as a classroom teacher at Queen Elizabeth High School in Edmonton 11 years ago, many of the things that we see happening on a very surface level in terms of students being able to accept remote delivery and connecting on Zoom and talking to their peers this way would have seemed impossible. And I love this quote in which Alice says, "One can't believe impossible things," to which the Queen replies, "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I did it for at least half an hour a day. Why? Sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Friends, what we see right now, 3 years ago in an educational context, I would never have thought possible. Many of my colleagues with whom I worked said over their dead body, are they going to be using these technology tools that now they have at their disposal and are using every single day? The gist is are kids learning? Right? Are kids using these online tools to make their learning more profound, or rather are they actually learning less? And I think to speak to this, we need to put this in the context of the reality that teachers still feel that they need to get across a multitude of information to their students in order for them to engage, and that they have been forced to do this using mediums that they have not accepted at a time where they were able to integrate it in a safe place and find innovative ways of being used it, but rather it's in the midst of a crisis. And that crisis, this is a statistic from 2019 before, in which Statistics Canada found that 1 out of every 5 youth described their mental state as fair to poor. And when you look at the fact that in the midst of COVID, 57% of youth have described it as worse than prior to COVID. Friends, the BC Federation of Teachers has come out with the fact that 70% of their teachers are concerned with mental health. On Tuesday, sorry, I met with my provincial councils. So I have councils of educators made up of superintendents and principals and teachers all across Canada in each of the regions. And I was meeting with them, and we were talking about how their teachers are literally holding on, not literally, figuratively, sorry, holding on with their fingernails. They are stressed. They are going out on mental leave, and we are only at the beginning of it. Right. I was talking to a superintendent just outside of Toronto in the Peel School District, and he was sharing how his teachers feel now as in November the level of stress that they feel before spring break, and that was just back in November. Right. And so here we have this online education, this online learning that's taken place in a very difficult situation, and what I would call pandemic online education, because this is what we're seeing right now. It has been about survival. It's been about translating worksheets onto Zoom that rather may have been done at desk. Now, this is an oversimplification. Friends, we've seen there's brilliant work that our teachers are doing, and I have 5 children, and I have a daughter in grade 12 who's doing incredibly well, and all of my children have exceptional teachers. And in the Center for Global Education, we work in 45 countries. And I can tell you that the gift of the amazing teachers we have in this country is exceptional, and we should be so very grateful for. But I'll tell you, my second oldest son in grade 10 is struggling immensely and has had a terrible time transitioning to online education. And I can tell you from the conversations that I have that this is something that's struggling all across Canada. So what I would like to do is I want to propose, friends, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second before I transition to the next part, is that good education, good online education is not necessarily, is about more than just online education, shifting practices online. And I think it's about what Adriana spoke about providing those opportunities for students to authentically engage. And we need to actually go back to what happened before. We need to go back to what happened before the pandemic and say, okay, what was education like in our classrooms first, right? What was it before? Because this is essentially what has been translated through this crisis into online education. And so if we take a look at a couple of those statistics, and I'll throw this back up, and unfortunately, they're not awesome. Where we saw, this is basically each graph, and sorry, I got rid of my group, my legend of this, was that the higher up we go in education, the less meaning and interest that our students are finding. In a study of high school dropouts done by the Bill and Gates Foundation, almost half of the students said that they've dropped out because, not because they didn't understand, but rather because they were bored, right? The education that they saw was not relevant. They were not the heroes of their classroom, right? Their teacher was basically leading the show, and they were absorbing the information that they had taking place. Friends, when we are graduating a group of young people who think that the world that they are growing into is one that they do not see themselves within, if they don't have those hope, and friends, whether it is online education or in-person education, I think a core aspect of whatever learning that takes place is hope. What is the hope that we are providing for students? How are we providing meaning for students in the learning that is taking place? How are we linking them to the world that they see around them? How is that being reflected in what they're learning in the classroom? And that, friend, is what is the core mandate of what the Center for Global Education does, is that we want to develop virtual collaborative learning projects that engage and empower youth as global citizens through connecting them to people and places that they're learning about in their classroom. Now, I don't want to give an infomercial for the Center for Global Education because, friends, there's a ton of organizations out there that are doing this. I'm just going to talk about a couple of the projects that we're doing as exemplars of what I believe it has to be a fundamental aspect, because if we're going to expect students to learn these skills that they require, this knowledge that they require to be successful, we need to create for them an ecosystem in which they find meaning, that they find authenticity, and they find a connection. And whether that's and this is where the online learning is incredible, where we can connect. In one of our projects called Decarbonize, we link together all 45 of our countries, and students spend an 8-month period from K to 12, right? Connecting to their friends all across the planet, engaging deeply in art, engaging deeply in synthesis of culture and climate realities that they're facing. And then ultimately putting together a paper that they present to the leaders of the planet at the United Nations Climate Change Conference. This year was canceled, but we're working right now under the moral patronage of UNESCO to present this paper to at the next climate conference. And whether it's that kind of work that we're doing here or whatever we have to do, the opportunities our students have now through the use of this online, the teachers and students, they have the tools like they've never had them before, right? But now what we need to do, they have the Ferraris, right? They have this, but we need to give them the highway to drive on. Otherwise, what use is it, right? Whether you're sitting in a Ferrari, you're sitting in a Lada, or sitting in your couch, if all you're doing is parked in the garage, it's about as useful, right? So what we need to do, and what we do, and again, providers that are out there, and our teachers have the resources to now access, they have the tools to access, is to drive on those highways so that they can make those opportunities not something that is extraordinary, but friends, I would say our goal needs to be that we make them the ordinary experience. And I want to talk very briefly about another study that we did actually in partnership with Perry before I wrap up, and with the Alberta Council of Technology, so back a few years ago. But I think part of that meaning is not just a matter of yes, we know that climate change is a reality, or we work with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and students are doing their grade 11 social studies in that context of creating a report for and doing the work and collaborating around those imminent global issues. But I would say that another piece, and this is what we found specifically looking out to youth in Alberta around this study called The Future of Work that we published in 2018. And I'm sure that Perry can refer you to where you might find more information about that. This is some great statistics that we found talking specifically to Alberta youth. And I'll throw this up. Oh, that's not the right button. I gotta press present. Is that students are seeing the world that they're going to inherit, the reality of the work that they want to do, they want to find meaning within, and then they're not seeing that reflected in the learning experiences that they have in the classroom. This is from a student at an Alberta high school, Queen Elizabeth High School. I want to take an active role in shaping my future. I just don't know how to find a seat at the table. So the study that we did involved 1,900 Alberta youth from 6 diverse communities who collaborated for over 6,000 years. We brought together 30 young leaders, 200 active co-creators, and then close to 2,000 youth from grade 7 to 12 who participated through the creation of art, project-based learning. And there were 3 focuses that the youth talk in terms of linking their meaningful learning to, and in terms online learning. And this is, and I mean, the implications in online learning is huge, right? Where they're looking at what are the sources of the change that are coming at them, what are the global trends and sociological implications, and then how does education need to respond to that? And I think this is a core piece, and I'm gonna end with this, is to what extent do you feel confident that you are in charge of your future? And friends, over 50% of our youth felt that they were either neutral, that they did not know how they stood in terms of their future, or felt that they were not able to be in the position to decide the fate that they have. And I would say, friends, with the tools that are out there in terms of the online learning, what we need to do is make sure that our students have the meaning within, and then take the tools that they have at their disposal now and bring them into a reality in whatever context that they find that. So I'll pass it back to you, John.
Great, thank you, Terry. And I'll just comment before we move to Moira that there was a really strong theme running from both Adriana's presentation and Terry's, and that's how do we ensure that there's quality in online learning for students. And it's a powerful theme. I would ask everybody to be thinking about that as we move to Moira. And I think she'll have some experiences to share directly with students in her past. So Moira, I'll turn it over to you, ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then share your insights relative to online learning. Is it working?
There we are. So I am Moira Walker, Professor Emeritus, U of A and Turon Fellow. And I've taught all aspects of literacy development at the university level and worked in a clinical environment with children experiencing difficulties in literacy development. And I also produced online literacy products for British Telecom, for the UK, and for the United States of America. So when I saw Perry's posting about the webmail, I was kind of curious. So I thought, I'm going to interview some children. So I interviewed 7 of them. So if you bear with me, I'll tell you what they said. Overall, they're negative, by the way. So about their experience at the present time. The little ones in grades 6 to 7, they really say, I'm missing my friends. I'm missing interacting with my teachers. And I like being with my family. So they like being at home online because they said they got lots of family with mummy and daddy. But when we go to a final year high school student, and these students are all, the ones I interviewed, they're all above average. They're kind of the honors lot. She said to me, well, I got headaches and I really felt very anxious and I missed all my friends. But, you know, I felt safe at home because, you know, at school, the kids are not following the protocol rules for COVID. And I really enjoy family time, and I'm less anxious about COVID. Not much to say, but very upset at missing all the social events of the final years of high school. And going into university, she said, I'm in anyway. I said, what do you mean you're in anyway? She said, well, I don't need a high school diploma. I just need the marks. So anyway, that was her. Then we have a grade 10 student who is very introspective. And she says, and I need to quote her, I empathize with teachers as that they had no training on this online learning. The initial flaw in the whole process was students were not monitored or involved. So you could let your work pile up. I eventually was doing 8 to 10 hours of schoolwork per day, and this affected my mental health. Now, with a new system of quarters, where we only get 2 subjects a quarter, and we have Google Meet, this gives the classroom a kind of away from home feeling. And I'm a hands-on learner, but from this experience, I now have the ability of individual education and motivation for the rest of my life. So she thinks this is good, that she's going to be able to study on her own now that she hasn't done before. And I think this is connected to Adriana's point of transformation. She said, school during COVID is a learning opportunity, plain and simple. Our limits are tested every day as a stranger way of life is forced upon us. This has been a crucial experience for my development as a person, and I have never been so challenged in my life. So that was the grade 10. Now I also interviewed a junior high school teacher who has fantastic computer skills, and also she's a very, very good teacher. She said she found it was very easy for the students to disengage. She said many teachers don't require them to put on cameras, so they don't even know if the students are there when they're teaching. So it's very easy to be passive and also be mechanical. She noticed lots of nervousness and anxiety in the students. And she said many of her co-teachers lack the skills. It's not their fault, but they just lack the skills. And this often leaves a child to be instructed by the parent, which can be good or bad. And she said, my choice is teaching in person. So the overall message that I got was they all crave the human interaction in person. And I think the way I see learning is taking place, I haven't seen any computer system do it yet. So that's all I wanted to add to the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Moira. Before we open up the general conversation and questions, I just want to quote from a study that was done some years ago. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, Alberta education was very interested in distance learning, especially in small rural schools where their resources and number of teachers and the range of expertise among the teaching body was less than in urban high schools that were typically quite large. So they were looking at how can we use in Alberta distance education to provide opportunities for students in these small rural schools. So we contracted with primarily Dr. Bruce Clark at the University of Calgary, and also Margaret Hahi at the University of Alberta was involved in the evaluations. And Bruce published a study titled Distance Education en Route from Management to Pedagogy. I just wanted to quote, now I should mention this study is available online through ERIC. If you wanted to download a full copy of it. I just wanted to quote a couple of key observations and insights that emerged from that study under the subhead of pedagogy. And Bruce and the evaluation team observed that curricular goals cross cognitive, psychomotor, attitudinal, and interpersonal domains. I think we heard that in both Adriana and Terry and Moira's presentations. So when we think about quality, and that was a driving theme in all of the presentations, how do we assess quality in each of those four domains: cognitive, psychomotor, attitudinal, and that interpersonal relational context? One of the big conclusions of the study was they observed first, only a small number of high school students appear by nature to be independent learners who function comfortably without extrinsic motivation. But in the chats, people were saying, well, aren't there some students who naturally are better learners in an online context? And that would seem clearly to be the case. So online learning isn't necessarily bad for all students. It may be actually superior for some students, was one of the observations that came out of the distance learning study. In addition, they observed helping students keep up with their work in independent study is, in fact, a subset of a more general need for student support. And again, that was a major theme in the presentations. Assisting students to adapt to the myriad of differences between the classroom or traditional education and independent learning is a key requirement. And lastly, from the study, one of the biggest challenges is to help the student make a mental switch from an environment in which everything important is taught by the teacher, while the print materials are supplementary to one in which the important content is contained in the mediated materials, and students must learn from them, getting supplementary help from teachers. I think that was a key point in Adriana's presentation. So I think there's some potential here and this was brought out partially by Terry's presentation about the importance of authentic engagement and the potential risk of student alienation, to think that traditional education is somehow automatically better than online education. And it's interesting. My master's thesis at U of A was on student alienation. And more recently, after I did my doctorate at the U of A, I was director of research with Rocky View Schools, where we researched extensively the concept of student engagement. And in almost every study you look at regarding student engagement, or the flip side, student alienation, kids seem to become less engaged with education in a formal sense as they go through the education system. So you think of kids in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, go into that classroom, those kids are absolutely turned on to education. They're excited, they're enthused. And yet what we see almost consistently is that students continue through the grades, they become less enamored with education. So I wrote a blog when I was with Rocky View Schools, and I'm saying our challenge as educators is to turn kids on consistently to learning. And that becomes a challenge both in traditional and in online learning. So I'll just make that comment. And you can look at any study on student engagement and you'll see this pattern relative to kids becoming less engaged as they become older. I know in my own kids' case, I wanted them to enter education and become teachers like their dad, but none of them did. And one of my kids said, I'm just doing school because I'm just not enamored with it. So that's a little personal experience. So some of the critical themes I thought that came out of the presentation was Adriana's observation that online learning automatically involves competition with a lot of competing distractors, and that the teacher in an online context clearly needs to be a mentor, a helper, but most critically a motivator. So those are challenges for online learning. And out of the previous webinar, I think it was observed that teacher training historically doesn't really prepare teachers who, to mirror Terry's comments, are obviously committed as professionals to doing the best they can, but they don't necessarily have the training. So the system overall might need to make adjustments over time, as online learning may, in fact, not just because of pandemics, but because I think the experience that is driven by the pandemic will drive more learners to want to learn in that context as well. But I don't think we're going to see a mass migration away from traditional education, just given the custodial responsibility and role that in-school learning provides. I think those are the key themes that I observe coming out of these presentations. And again, I want to thank Adriana, Terry, and Moira for their contributions to this conversation. And I think at that point, we can pretty well turn it open to open questions. I don't see everybody, the 48 participants in my screen at one time. Claire, do you see everybody in terms of hand raising or this type of thing? And you have to unmute to respond, Claire.
If you want to raise your hands, you go to reactions down below, and there's a spot there you can raise your hand. Or some of you may have a hand icon down below that you can press. But if you go to the reactions and press the hand, such as that, it will know that you're there.
Okay, but again, I don't see all the participants. I'm only seeing about 6 at a time, so it's hard.
Yeah, so I'll jump back and forth between. And
change your view. There's an icon at the top, and it's change your view, and you can turn it into like a gallery view, and then you can see everybody.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, but with this many people, you only get about half of them at a time.
Right. So
Sure.
what's our solution here in terms of seeing people who want to jump?
Okay, I'll jump
well,
back.
It looks like Kim Soltz has raised his hand first. So Kim should go first.
Okay,
Kim Soles.
Unmute, Kim. There you go.
I just thought I would reflect on this from sort of medical school perspective, where things are a lot clearer than they are, I think, at earlier levels of education. We had a lot of unsatisfactory teaching conferences before the pandemic came. And when we changed to Zoom, everything was better. We got more people, the people liked it more, and particularly, they were impressed with the quality of the graphics, which in our old face-to-face meetings were never as good as they now are. And the opinion is that no matter what happens with the pandemic, they don't ever want to go back to face-to-face because this Zoom education seems to be superior in every way. Now that is obviously not true for teaching, like, procedures and stuff like that, but just for sort of conveying facts at the level of like medical students, medical residents, faculty teaching, younger people, faculty teaching other faculty, it is working better now in most areas than it did before. The other thing has to do with agency, whether you feel empowered that you can change the world, right? I mean, Adriana was saying that most students feel like passive victims of the future. They cannot take charge of their own future. And over a 2-year period, I'll just tell you what happened. There was younger colleague and me did a series of videos about basically digital education and artificial intelligence, complaining about inaccuracies in other people's teaching. Everything we complained about was quickly reacted to and changed. So everything we complained about in those videos, you can no longer find. It's not there anymore. It's not just that we reached people, but I mean, effective education changes human behavior. And that's what we did over that 2-year period. And not just with obscure people. We changed human behavior for the government of Finland, for famous tech author Yuval Noah Harari. And there's nothing special about us. I'm not telling you this because I have capabilities you don't have. I'm telling it because you can do the same. That online, it's a lot easier to change the world than it is face-to-face and one-on-one encounters. That's sort of slow. But online, you can change big things quickly. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So any questions about that? Are you clear what I'm describing? And you can easily see it. You can just search on my name. I have 1,400 videos on YouTube, but if you look at the ones from 2018 to 2020, you will see exactly what I mean. We're critiquing things, and if you look for where the things are we critiqued,
we've got
none of them exist.
We've got 3 other hands up here, so I'm going to move on to Perry Shulak. What did you have for us, Perry?
Perry Shulak, Critical Fusion. Yeah, I've been involved in developing interactive e-learning resources for some 30 years, but it got to the point where I found that the biggest missing link in all of this was the inspiration and motivation factor. What is it that gets kids interested in wanting to learn, and as well adapting the knowledge that they acquire and utilizing it. And in going through that experience, I sort of shifted into a whole different avenue and started developing immersive dome content. I wrote and developed the immersive dome animation production that's called Legends of the Northern Sky, that was running at the TELUS World of Science. And the difference is that this particular topic was First Nations based, but the impact was that it drove busloads of First Nations kids into the Space Science Center who'd never been there before. It brought their knowledge and experience into that world, allowed them to get into a big, massive open space as a group and experience stories for themselves. And so this is a whole different way of learning, but in this manner, the kind of the emotional impact is much greater. I don't know if you've been in the dome, but it's astounding. The current system runs 10K in resolution, and the resolution is just outstanding. But it's a whole different approach to delivering content that changes the kind of the aspect of the experience, so that rather than saying being independent and connected to a computer, you're experiencing the learning as a group. And so allows for communication between individuals. And right now I do have other projects in process, one where on machine learning that brings people right into the world, data world. Another one on the evolution of T-Rex, where we can bring them out, way out, immerse them in bone beds in southern Alberta and northern Alberta at the same time. And so we actually can take groups of people to destinations as a whole and bring them into the real world rather than sitting them behind kind of a square screen. And I think in some ways online learning has its place, but I think more so we need to be providing more support for facilities like the TELUS World of Science so that they can develop these group engaging experiences.
Thanks, Perry. Next, Laura Bell.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you to the presenters. That was really quite wonderful. Terry, it's good to see you again. A couple of things struck me, first of all. The one being that it felt like we were talking about older students. And we really need to think in terms of also the small children, the kindergarten grade 1 people. So the New York Times last Sunday opened up a phone line where parents could call in to scream or to say something. And there were a lot of screams. And when people spoke, the biggest stress they were facing was homeschooling their kids, supervising education during the pandemic. So my thought is there is great benefit in many cases to online learning opportunities, the pace at which you learn, meeting people like Terry does, connecting people around the world or even across a city and so on. But there also will need to be that piece about where are the children and who is in there with them and what are the other things the adult has to look after. There's also the education piece as a whole for me. There are two different schools of thought still going around here where there's the old version of Robert Fulghum's Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, which is an institutionalization of certain values, I think. And then there's the newer one, which says home is where the start is, which is speaking to the pedagogy of place. And one of the things, as Perry suggested, where does that interest in learning, the curiosity, the creativity, the imagination, all of those things are birthed in the earliest years. A child who is in an environment where people are reading and there's that sort of active, curious stimulation going on, they develop that just like they're learning how to walk better and how to do additional tasks. So the early childhood education, I think, will remain something that has to be done in a community. It cannot be done by the parents alone because the nuclear family is too small to meet the psychological needs of the developing child. So you need that community support around you, and it needs to be diverse. Carrying forward from our talk last week, The Future of Work, where Bruce explained to us so ably the future of AI, and he spoke there about emotional literacy being the thing that will make somebody very hireable in the world of AI. And to that, I add cross-cultural literacy. And again, where are kids going to get that? It's not going to be best served in a curriculum-based environment. It's going to be in a learning environment, the places where we live and the places where they play. So to me, those are pieces that would need to be put into framing the education of our children moving forward, be it online, be it in schools, or be it a combination of both, according to the needs of that particular family and community.
Do you know of any creative learning environments?
Oh, hi, Perry. Actually, yes, I do. We've done a couple in Toronto with the pre-kindergarten and the kindergarten kids, and it only came up because of COVID and the daycares being closed. So I called a couple of early childhood educators I knew, and we put in place some neighborhood-based education programs, explorations for the little ones. And they are, the parents are ever so happy. They're sending me lots of love. The other one is in some of the intentional communities that I'm monitoring in the United States. The design of the place itself lends itself to connection, and the central part, there's always like a mini community league hall in every single one of those. Well, because of the shutdown, those halls had to be repurposed. They didn't meet the basic social needs they were designed for, but what they became were workspaces. So parents now could take turns supervising the children learning, and you had the diversity in the different groups of parents. So in one case, it was 30 households. So we had different experiences, different ages. We had some seniors and we had some younger families. So these kids were in, like their cohort was 30 households essentially. And their common house became their schoolroom. And then part of the common house was where some of the parents could work as well. So the parents were sharing the education portion so that no one became overwhelmed or lost. And if a child needed help, they didn't just have the parent to rely on. So the intentional community design actually ended up working very well and being able to adapt very quickly to the changing needs of the children. So that's what we call a learning environment.
Claire, do we have other people wanting to speak?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just bring up, tie the session back to, an earlier, the previous session, and that is the role that AI could play in and is playing in education, and maybe ask some of the presenters like Adriana, who I know has a degree in AI, to maybe make some comments about it. And there's a massive opportunity here with AI to create something that has never existed on the planet before, and that is a truly interactive, intelligent system that can engage a user dynamically, addressing their specific interests and their specific needs, dynamically generating content that is applicable to them. And what we see is some of the newer educational systems taking advantage of what AI can do in this regard. What machine learning allows you to do is specifically identify areas in which a person is having trouble and direct content to them that that is applicable to their specific needs. And there's no way that people can do that. You have a classroom of 100 kids. Well, there's no way that you can on a moment by moment basis figure out who's struggling with what concept. You have the ability to create virtual presenters, for example. You think about if you've got 10,000 students that are going to look at, say, somebody teach math 30. Well, why do you have 1,000 teachers? Why don't you just have one teacher that's the best teacher of all teachers, present that material, but in an engaging way that, so students can engage with, something that's more dynamic, and they can actually, experiment, try. This is where learning is maximized. So, I think that we have a huge opportunity, and especially in the time of pandemic where people are forced now to use these tools, I think that there should be, I think that it's an opportunity for us to really reimagine what education can be in the age of AI.
Just maybe further to Bruce's point, Adriana, before you respond, is I would ask us to think about how we can use formative assessment as a way to personalize learning and provide unique feedback to individual students. Even if you have the one teacher teaching 1,000 or 10,000 students, how is their learning best assessed in a personalized context? So Adriana, can you comment on that as well?
Yes, and there are many people in this phone call that I recognize that have an amazing background on artificial intelligence. So I'll pass it to them as well. I'll start with an interesting thought process. And I think I put it in the chat window. AI is really good at finding patterns. That's what AI is good at. Humans are better at nuance and context and that kind of fuzziness around it. So when you think about the role of AI and the role of AI in being amazing and better than humans at finding patterns, where does AI find those patterns? It finds their own data. And up to now, we haven't had a lot of data that AI could go through in order to get to that point that Bruce describes, which is being able to adapt to learner needs. So step one, and if we think about that in terms of scaffolding, step one is the data. Step one is understanding who are the different types of learners, what are their needs, where do they drop off when they are proceeding through their education. And also going to tie it a little bit just for a minute to what Laura Bell was saying. Again, this is a process. And it starts in kindergarten. In kindergarten, grade 1, you are learning how to learn. So until you have that point of learning how to learn, and then you start applying those principles, there is no point in trying to get kids to be self-motivated in learning themselves. They need to learn how to learn. So one of the phrases that is stuck in my mind is where do you see most kids starting to lose, and I think Terry, you were talking about this, where do they lose interest in education? Around grade 4. Next one, where do girls lose interest in education? In high school. Girls start being interested in or start thinking, at least up to now, about, oh, I need to look dumb, or I need to look. So all of these are steps in which we are losing kids and then losing adults where they get demotivated from education. Now bringing it back to artificial intelligence. We have these concepts, we understand these through studies and through analyzing data. But what AI can do is it can process the data that is going out through online classrooms, all that data that is being accumulated by Microsoft Teams, by Zoom. Where are kids shifting their attention to something else? All that is data that machine learning algorithms can start processing, and then can start then using it back to help teachers, because at the end of the day is how can AI help teachers back to engage learners? So what are the different patterns that we see in grade 4? What are the different patterns that we see in high school, where kids are losing motivation, and then how AI can create those dynamics path back? I'll leave it there with a couple of thoughts, but I know Kathy, who I see on the phone call,
we have a couple more people with their hands up. Kathy is one of them. I want to get to her before we get to the end here.
And you know what, maybe if I could just very briefly, and I apologize, I actually have to leave early. My daughter starts her violin lesson here right away, but just as a specific example of what Adriana is talking about, on the College Board, we have about 5 million students who write our assessments every year in over 100 countries. And as students prepare for these exams, we have created an AI tool that essentially that students navigate their way through, and then it provides students with instantaneous feedback on what they've learned, what they need to learn, and then provides that feedback to the teachers to take that data and interpret it to each student. So we're not saying this is to replace any teachers. Rather, this is to allow teachers to focus in on those areas of misunderstanding so they can address it specifically to the needs of each student. And this is happening right now for millions of students, real time. And it's a very base level application, but it's there and it's there. And my apologies that I do have to run early. But thank you so much, everybody, for this. And I'll pass it back to John and the rest of our guests.
Actually, we're going to pass it back to Kathy King. She had her hand up for some time here. So unmute Kathy and let's hear from you.
Thanks, Claire. And good to see you, Adriana. And hi, Terry. No, I can totally echo what Terry was presenting, as well as what Adriana just said, not only as a parent of a grade 4 student who is actively experiencing what you're saying, Adriana, as disconnecting from the current curriculum. My son is at home doing online learning. And just so all of you know me, I've spent the last 2 years as the managing director for the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute. So when Bruce talks about AI, we've been developing curriculum to train organizations for the last 2 years. And prior to that, I was involved in K-12, actually building resources for synchronous and asynchronous learning in the K-12 system with the 64 jurisdictions around the province. So as a parent, I'm absolutely seeing what Adriana's saying. We actually have gone on Dinos 101, which is one of Onlia's courses. And my son in grade 4 is more interested in going on the online learning MOOC of Dinos 101 because it's more engaging and where he's at than his experience with a teacher who is phenomenal, but she's had to adapt her traditional classroom methods quite quickly to online, as opposed to being able and supported to leverage the online tools to create some authentic learning experiences. And so I think from a ecosystem perspective, what we're seeing in the K-12 sector is that we have some amazing teachers, but some of the supports that we had, you know, from 2006 to say 2014, in terms of the funding, in terms of like the encouragement for some of our very talented teachers to actually do some innovative projects, that support no longer exists, or else there's very tiny pockets of support and it becomes very competitive for teachers then to apply to. So I think, you know, it's supporting our amazing teachers that we do have, allowing them to actually build the authentic learning experiences. I had a chance with Terry when he was first starting the Global Center for Education to actually facilitate one of his connections, where I actually traveled to Nicaragua and we had the 45 classrooms around the world where we connected to each other to do a global fundraiser as part of the social action. And Terry talked about, you know, students want to know that their education has an impact and know that they can make the world a better place. And if we create the authentic learning experiences, we then empower those students and engage them. And so, you know, I see that with my son right now, you know, experiencing education in pandemic times is not ideal for him. But if we can take the champions like we're seeing with Adriana, like we're seeing with Terry and some of the others on the call, you know, to create those authentic experiences, to have the support, and then like Adriana and Terry both said, actually to use AI, and Bruce mentioned this as well, to seek those patterns where we see high level of engagement, and also to seek the patterns to give us the data to help improve the learning. Because as Adriana said at the very beginning, online isn't going away, but I think we have to let go of some of the traditional models, which still has us just transitioning traditional education online, as opposed to just leveraging the tool and creating new experiences where we're more the sage, not the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. So that was just my input.
Thanks, Kathy. We
Thanks,
got
Claire.
some more hands up here. Ken Berry, could you keep it short? We're getting very close to the end here. So.
Okay, so I'll be kind of brief. The one point that I just wanted to make is, to me, the most important thing within education is really the socialization aspect, and that really starts very early in the education process. The fear I have is that with these various technologies that are being introduced, the concern would be around the technologies. Everyone's enamored by the technologies as opposed to the techniques of using that technology. So I've just had my first experience, because I went back to school in January of last year, and then starting in March, it all went online. And at the University of Calgary, there was D2L, which has a huge amount of capabilities, but I think there are various people learning on how to use those tools effectively. So rather than be enamored by the technologies, we should be searching and analyzing the techniques. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And next we have two more hands up here. We have Joseph Batty. I'd like you to give us what your thoughts are, and then Perry has his hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to follow up a couple of things. My daughter happens to be teaching at the Australian International School in Jakarta, Indonesia, and they've been doing this for about a year now. And a couple things. First of all, what Laura talks about, their experiences there are it doesn't work at all in kindergarten to about grade 5 or grade 6. She says that children are simply their attention span just simply doesn't connect whatsoever. The rest of them, they love it. Okay, but her from a strategic point of view, because we need to think about when you talk about tactical, that's fine, but from a strategic point of view, she says something like this: almost in the blink of an eye, we've made a very large percentage of our teachers and our schools obsolete. And to think that if we're going to go back to normal and that our teachers and our schools are going to be assembled in the same fashion is nonsense. She says the system assumes because you are already a teacher that you have the ability to retrain yourself. Again, not true. And that's what Ken is talking about. You can have the technology all you want, but it's the techniques. What they had to do in order to, now they're different. First of all, they're a private school, so it has to run a little bit business-like. So because their teachers pay, their parents pay large amounts of money to as private. Well, they had to stop and say, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to adapt our techniques? That's really, really important, Ken. The technology is wonderful, but to being able to create a delivery process is really, really difficult. Her personal experience is this, that now she teaches at the higher levels. She teaches history and English. And when I talk about English, most of the students have English as their second language because their students are from Japan and Korea and China and Vietnam and Thailand and places like that. And so they come there without the knowledge of English. But she says the most important advantage that she sees is now she's able to create an engagement situation, but she says it takes away the intimidation factor that a shy student might have in a regular learning environment. She says they won't say anything on my Zoom, my technical calls, but I guarantee you, if they have something to say, as soon as the time is up, the class is up, they'll be on to me immediately after. And she says, Miss Jill, I have a question now. Can I answer it? So it's really, she says, the interaction in that fashion, it means that she believes herself that she can get to virtually all the students and have all the students say something and ask interesting questions. So I completely concur with you. We need to think about this from a strategic point of view, because essentially our systems are now obsolete, and to be able to think that we're going to go back and do nothing except just recreate the classroom is complete nonsense. So might be helpful.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Or Joseph, sorry. And Perry, you want to wrap things up for us? You've had your hand up for a while.
Well, it's timely that I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do the wrap up. But before I get into a few concluding comments, I want to thank John for stepping up on short notice. You did a marvelous job, and I really, really liked what you had to say about Bruce Clark's study. I'm hoping you'll send me, or I can get a copy of it, because I think that there are some very cogent points in there. Adriana, I didn't hear the presentation, I apologize, but clearly what I did pick up in the Q&A was your orientation to the relevance of AI, and I'll comment on that in a moment. But Terry, I know extremely well. I knew full well Terry do a super job. Whether he got into how systems are adapting, I heard in his concluding comments some relevance to how systems are in fact adapting at the millions of level to appreciate the relevance of education becoming more personalized. And Moira, spontaneous as always, that you gave us personal insight into what you're learning as Professor Emeritus. It's not that you're full of yourself, it's that you've remained and continue to keep that passion for the students, and that was apparent. But we do these, or at least I do these and arrange these because I have a passion for something in particular that I think most of you are aware of, and that is the personalization of systems. That we've come a long way in building supply in Canada to a point that we stand, as recently acknowledged, third in the world as a nation of innovation, but we stand 13 in terms of getting results. The point being, we spent a lot of time building supply, but we really haven't converted that supply, that magnificent set of systems that we have, to indeed becoming effective as it relates to why they were put there in the first place, to serve people, to serve students, to serve patients, to serve clients. And the excitement of these presentations is what COVID has done, is it's advanced and accelerated a realization that these systems were built for people, not for suppliers. And that transition, which AI is now enabling, that systems can, in fact, in the usage of AI, begin to personalize the knowledge that they have and the offerings that they give. That's a challenge to teachers, to realize that we're flipping the coin from the teacher being in charge to realizing that they're only there because there are students in need. So I share that with you because that's really the theme of what we're really all about. And I hear it echoed over and over again. Though we throb from a focus on the individual to a realization that it's systems that we've been building to try and serve individuals. And those systems today are being exposed and embarrassed that they sometimes have forgotten why they were there in the first place. I have a question for all of you, and I'm hoping you might respond back to me. Next session, we can continue with this theme, and the fact that Haley couldn't join us today meant that she didn't do the wrap-up presentation about the relevance of innovation and creativity or humanization of systems. We could next week focus on creativity and innovation, whether it be in education or in any system of supply. There's also been push around fintech and what's happening in the world of finance and how rapidly, not just banking, but savings, even collections is being overhauled as a product of emerging technologies. And there's also the world of e-health, which of course Bruce knows well, and many others. So I'm hoping you might give me some feedback, not necessarily now, but through emails or whatever. You know, where do you see us focusing for next week? I have a bias that this went very well. We had a good audience attention of simply transitioning from where we were today to innovation and creativity in education. But I welcome your input because really this is to continue to build and grow and do what we've done today effectively. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, John, again, for showing up in very short notice, and for Jackie being in a backup role as well. And for all of you joining us, I hope it worked. I'd love to get feedback from you and everybody. Thank you, Randy, for the heart, for the thumb. Thank you for the heart, Randall. And thank you all for the smiles. Have a nice weekend. And thank you, Claire.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
I know you guys are hanging up. I just put my email in the chat. If you could add me to your list, that would be great.
Who is that speaking?
Sorry, Kirsty Walker from Fresh Start Mediation. Thank you.